Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Most welcome to the class of International Financial Management. Today is our seventh lecture of International Financial Management. Today we will discuss the government influence on exchange rates, that how governments influence the exchange rates. The objectives of today's lecture will be to describe the exchange rate system used by various governments, to explain how governments can use direct and indirect intervention to influence exchange rates, and to explain how government intervention in the foreign exchange market can affect economic conditions. Dear students, due to the length of video, today we only discuss the exchange rate systems used by the various governments. The remaining part, that is how governments can use direct and indirect interventions to influence exchange rates, and explain how government intervention in the foreign exchange market can affect economic conditions, will be discussed in the lecture 8. Today only we discuss the exchange rate system which are used by the different governments. Clear? So let me start with the very first topic, that is exchange rate system. Exchange rate system is a system where the government controls. The exchange rates are controlled by the government. When government controls the exchange rate, it's called exchange rate system. And these are classified according to the degree to which rates are controlled by the government. Exchange rates normally fall into one of the following categories. The first is fixed exchange rate system, the freely floating exchange rate system, the managed floating exchange rate system or dirty exchange rate system, or the pledged exchange rate system. These four exchange rate systems will be discussed today, and the government interventions will be discussed in the next class, in next lecture. Let's study one by one. Let me start with the first, that is fixed exchange rate system. Fixed exchange rate system is exchange rate system either held constant or allowed to fluctuate only within very narrow bands. Okay, students, its name denotes, name of the system explains us that fixed means constant. If the exchange rate is held constant, it is called fixed exchange rate system. Or fluctuate is only within very narrow bands. Very narrow bands. Very narrow bands means that the exchange or fluctuation in exchange rate is allowed only within 1 and 2%. Means that the country is allowed to change or devalue its exchange rate, or devalue its currency, or devalue its money by only in between 1 and 2%. 1.1% or 1.5% or 1.2%. So these are the bands for the countries. They are not allowed to exchange or change their exchange rates more than 2%. It's called narrow bands. And they are not allowed to change or devalue its currency or its money in foreign exchange market by themselves. They must get permission from the IMF, from the International Monetary Fund. So this fixed exchange rate system era was the Bretton Woods era. Bretton Woods Conference was held in 1944 by the different countries, member countries, a lot of member countries. They were participating in that conference. In that conference, they decided that every currency, every exchange rate will be fixed forever. And this currency's value will be determined on the terms of gold. in the terms of gold. So this conference was held in 1944, but it was only operated till 1971. After 1971, the era was ended. The era was ended. The fixed exchange rate system was ended in 1971. And after 1971, the Smithsonian Agreement, which allowed merely adjust the exchange rates and expanded the fluctuations boundaries. In this conference, in Smithsonian Conference or in Smithsonian Agreement, the boundaries, fluctuation boundaries were expanded. In Bretton Woods Conference, in Bretton Woods Agreement, there was only narrow band of 1 and 2%. But in Smithsonian Agreement, the boundaries were expanded. Maybe possible it was expanded to 5% to 10%. But the system was still fixed. Only the fluctuation boundaries were expanded. The system was still fixed. Clear? What all the pros and cons, mean advantages and disadvantages of fixed exchange rate system? The first pros, mean advantage, work becomes easier for the MNCs, for the multinational corporations. Multinational corporations easily work for their exchange rates. The organizations who are globalized, the organizations which are operating globally, the work for them was very easy because the exchange rate risk was ignored. There was no exchange rate risk. Why? Because they knew that all the exchange rates are fixed. But there is disadvantage that governments may revalue their currencies. In fact, the dollar was devalued more than once after the US experienced balance of trade deficit. At that time, US experienced balance of trade deficit. Their balance of trade was unfavorable. So this unfavorable balance of trade experienced the US to devalue its currency. And why they devalue the currency? Because to increase the exports and decrease the imports, restrict the imports and trigger the exports in the foreign countries. So the US devalued its currency. The next advantage, that was each country may become more vulnerable to economic conditions in other countries. This was advantage. They are vulnerable to the economic conditions. They are tied to the economic conditions of the other countries. So this was another advantage of the fixed exchange rate system. Second is free floating exchange rate system. Its name also denotes us, its name also explains us that it's a free floating exchange rate system. The exchange rate floats freely, are determined solely by market forces. And what is market forces? Market forces are the demand and supply of the currency in the foreign exchange market. If your currency supply is increased in the foreign currency, so it means that the currency exchange rate will be decreased or increased. If the supply or demand, so supply and demand is the market force, and this market force will determine the exchange rate. So it's called free floating exchange rate. But there are some advantages of the and disadvantages of the freely floating exchange rates. The first advantage, each country may become more insulated against the economic problems in other countries. They are insulated, they are concentrated with the economic problems in the other countries. If there is an economic problem in other country, it will affect the domestic country. But there is disadvantage, that central bank intervention that may affect the economy unfavorable are no longer needed. So central bank will not intervene. Central bank is not needed to intervene in the exchange rates. It means that the government will not control the free floating exchange rate system. Either it goes up, either it goes down, either it's appreciated, either it's depreciated. So it means that it is not intervened by the government. There is no intervention of the central bank or the government. So this is on a disadvantage for the free floating system. Another advantage, governments are not restricted by exchange rate boundaries when setting new policies. The government is not restricted to make any policies about the boundaries of the exchange rates. They are not restricted. They leave loose the exchange rates. But there is disadvantage, less capital flow restrictions are needed. Capital flow restrictions are needed less. This is disadvantage. Why? Then capital flow increases, then enhancing the efficiency of the financial market. Thus, enhance the efficiency of the financial market. Next, cons is the MNC may need to devote substantial resources to managing their exposure to exchange rate fluctuations. If you remember, in fixed exchange rates, we said that MNCs, the work for MNCs are easy. Why? They are not bound to exposure to the exchange rate risk. But in freely floating exchange rates, MNCs are needed to devote a lot of resources, to bring a lot of resources to manage their exposure to exchange rate risk or fluctuation in the foreign exchange markets. So it is a con, it's a disadvantage for the MNC. That advantage for the country that initially experienced economic problems such as high inflation or increasing unemployment rate may have its problems compounded. They may have problems with the free floating exchange rates. May be possible their inflation will increase. May be possible their unemployment will increase. Why? They are already experiencing the inflation and unemployment increasing. So may be possible with the free floating exchange rate system, they will increase their inflation, they will increase their unemployment. So this will be a second disadvantage for the free floating system. Next system is managed float system or dirty float system, exchange rate system. It's a system allowed to move freely on a daily basis and no official boundaries or exist. There is no official boundary exist for the dirty floating exchange rate system. They are changed, they are moved, they are fluctuated daily basis. On the daily basis, the exchange rate is fluctuated. However, governments may intervene. In this exchange rate system, governments may intervene to prevent the rates from moving too much in a certain direction. It means that constantly, if an exchange rate is going up and up or down and down, it means the exchange rate is moving in the same direction. So at that time, governments may intervene to prevent the rates from moving too much in a certain direction. So this will be the floating exchange rate system. There are some cons or disadvantages for the managed float system or dirty floating exchange rate system. A government may manipulate its exchange rates such that its own country benefit at the expense of others. Governments manipulate its exchange rates. They process their exchange rates. They fluctuate their exchange rates. Why? Because they have its own benefit, own country benefit at the expense of others, which will cause the expense for other countries. So this is a disadvantage of the managed float exchange. Therefore, it's called dirty floating exchange rate system. Why it's dirty? Because if any government intervened or any government manipulated or fluctuated its exchange rate, the country will benefits, but in the expense of other country, at the expense of other country. Clear? In the pledged exchange rate system, the home currency's value is pledged to a foreign currency. This is another, it's a pledged currency. Pledged currency is a currency exchange rate system. The home currency's value is pledged to a foreign currency or to some unit of account and moves in line with that currency or unit against other currencies. The examples are given in your reading material, such as China pledged their currency with the US dollars. Mexico pledged their currency with the US dollars. It is a system where home country's value is pledged with the other country's currency's value, and the home currency's value moves in line with the foreign country's value. If the foreign country's value increases, the domestic country's value also increases. If the foreign country's value decreases, the home country or the domestic country's currency's value also decreases. So it's called fixed exchange rate system. The European Economic Community's snake arrangement was from 1970 to 1979. It held 7 years, paid the currencies of member countries within established limit of each other. It is called snake arrangement. You can Google it. The European snake arrangement from 1972 to 1979. It was currency, and there were member countries within established limit of each other. In fixed exchange rate system, the European Monetary System (EMS), which followed in 1979, hit the exchange rate of member countries together within a specified limit, and also paid them to a European currency unit (ECU) through the exchange rate mechanism (ERM). The ERM experienced severe problems in 1992 as economic conditions and goals varied among member countries. You can see all these concepts: ECU, ERM, EMS. You can see all these systems in Google. Clear? Next, in 1994, Mexico's central bank pegged the peso to the US dollar. Mexico's central bank pegged its peso to the US dollar. So as US dollar's value increases, the peso's value also increases. As the US dollar's value decreases, the peso's value also decreases, because they are pegged with each other, but allowed a band within which the peso's value could fluctuate against the dollar. But there are some boundaries, some bands, some limits in which the peso's value could fluctuate against the dollar. May be possible there is a small, a narrow band, a narrow boundary, a narrow limit in which the peso, the Mexico's peso, will fluctuate against dollar, but in common and generally it moves with the US dollar. By the end of the year, there was substantial downward pressure on the peso, and the central bank allowed the peso to float freely. The Mexican peso crisis had just begun. So at that time, there was a down pressure on the peso. There was a pressure to bring the downward the peso's value. The central bank allowed the peso to float freely. It was in 1994, but after that, the Mexico's peso was released from the pegged system of the US dollar. So it was fluctuating freely. At that time, the Mexican peso crisis had just begun. You can see the Mexican peso crisis. Next, currency board. A currency board is the system for maintaining the value of the local currency with respect to some other specified currencies. So it's a currency board. The aim of the currency board is to maintain the value of the local currency with respect to some other specified currency. For example, Hong Kong has tied the value of the Hong Kong dollar to the US dollar. Means that Hong Kong 7.8 Hong Kong dollars equal to $1 since 1983. While Argentina has tied the value of its peso to the US dollar. 1 peso is equal to $1 since 1991. Clear? For a currency board to be successful, how the currency board become a successful board? It must have credibility in its promise to maintain the exchange rate. It brings credibility in its promise to maintain the exchange rate. It has to intervene to defend its position against the pressure exerted by the economic conditions, as well as by speculators who are betting that the board will not be able to support the specified exchange rate. So it will become successful. The currency board will become successful. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. This was your today's lecture. We will discuss this lecture 8 in we will discuss the remaining parts of the today's lecture in lecture 8. The lecture 7 was too lengthy. I split it the lecture 7 into two parts. Some of the concepts discussed today in lecture 7 and the sum of concepts will be discussed in lecture 8. For now, have a good time, have a nice time. Thank you so much.